Thank you very much, Vincent. And good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. And welcome to this panel discussion on resilient and regenerative value chains. My name is Neil Walker. I'm from Forum for the Future. Just a little bit about us. We're a leading sustainability nonprofit that's been working internationally for more than 25 years to catalyze deep and transformative action in food, agriculture, energy, and business systems. Our partners include large companies, public sector actors, and NGOs, and our mission is to accelerate a just and regenerative future where people and planet thrive. Just to introduce myself, as said, I'm a senior strategist at Forum for the Future. I'm really thrilled to be taking part in the conference this year. And we're celebrating Forum's Cotton 2040 program, which has been operating since 2015. I've worked on over the last couple of years, and where we've demonstrated learning and impact around a future fit cotton sector and value chain. Over the past 7 years, Cotton 2040 was amongst the first initiatives to really bring together sustainable standards under one umbrella to confront the challenges of a sustainable cotton sector. The work has spanned over 250 value chain actors, from cotton standards to traders, to brands, to farmer groups across the world in India, Brazil, and the US. We've worked on climate adaptation, creating momentum on sustainable uptake, standard alignment, and how to finance the transition to regenerative cotton. All of this and a regenerative value chain is still far from certain. Our Learning and Impact report, launching later this month and funded by the Louders Foundation, will explore the successes, challenges, and lessons from those 7 years. I'm really excited to explore the topic today with our really excellent speakers. Sinem, first, is a consultant and lecturer with our own company, BluProjects, located in Istanbul, and brings her 20 years of experience in the textile industry across business functions. Sinem's passions are on the circular business development, encouraging women empowerment in the industry, and creating collaboration between like-minded companies. It's really great to have you with us, Sinem.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be here.
Rui Fontoura is the Global Brand Engagement Director at the Sourcery in the UK. It's a sourcing platform driving transparent trade and fair transactions through the supply chain. Before that was the Fibre and Material Strategy Lead at the Textile Exchange, where we first met Rui. And prior to joining Textile Exchange, had a number of different positions at Burberry and Diverse. From personal experience, I can say Rui is a creative and ardent advocate for deep change within the textile industry, and so welcome, Rui.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So given your experience, and please feel free to expand a little on your background, can you give us start off by giving us an understanding of what you think it means for a value chain to be regenerative? Sinem, perhaps you could start us off.
Yeah, sure. First of all, it's really very critical to talk more around the topic regenerative. And that's also what the event's name is, which is very critical because considering the style industry, what we have over the years is actually we all saw that to maintain a sustainable business model didn't help that much. So what now we need to shift our approach to a more regenerative business and value chain. And I it's for anyone, our listeners who is not that much engaged with this topic, is that to regenerate a business or system means that we also need to think about giving back to the environment or to the communities, which is a very critical point. And especially for our industry, which is using lots of natural resources and many business models around the workmanship. This is quite critical. And what I think is how is our current value chain and how it should be to become more regenerative is related to three critical discussions. I would maybe start like a dialogue. The first one is, Neil, around the data and the measurements. I think that there is a huge lack of trust and data in our industry. So how to build a regenerative system is very much related to the measurements to be more secure and the technologies around this. And secondly, how we can contribute is also very much linked to a network system. I would even call a value chain, but maybe we can even change it to value network, because it's only possible with a very certain amount of collaboration and collaborative thinking. So these two will be very much linked to a better future where we can secure a regenerative industry. So this is a more like a generic understanding from my side, but I would love to know what Rui is thinking on a more industrial point of view. So that's from my side what I can summarize.
Over to you, Rui.
I think it's right. I think nowadays we talk about regenerative and we talk about regenerative at the farm level, but it's very important, like Sinem was saying, the whole of the supply chain being connected. I think, if you talk specifically about cotton, you have, you've got the best economic practice where promote soil health, water management and biodiversity. But once that cotton is produced, you do have to have a supply chain that's interconnected, that's solid, that's prepared to face challenge that could happen throughout the supply chain. I know that's important. They are prepared to adopt change. Otherwise it's not going to be possible to embrace some of the changes that are happening at the farm level. Because without being able to be prepared to invest in change, and I'm talking investment from a financial perspective, from a time perspective, you also need to learn the time it takes to become regenerative. I think it's being able to place people and the environment at the forefront of what we do is key for a supply chain to be regenerative. Let's not forget, just because you purchase a cotton that is certified regenerative, or it could be even other preferred cotton initiatives exist around the world. A lot of them are doing great strides in becoming more and more protective of the environment, but in the sense of being regenerative. I think you need to be able to have that network connection throughout the supply chain from your grower up to the brand, and without that, it would be difficult to have that what we can call resilient and regenerative supply chain.
Thank you. Yeah. So for us, I mean, when we explored Cotton 2040 and the clues kind of in the name, we did look at kind of what it might look like for a value chain or for a cotton sector, a value network in 2040, and what that might look like. Just for you, like, what would be some of the key differences, do you think? What would really mark kind of the operations of a value chain that is just in kind of resilience and regenerative? Rui, perhaps.
I think it needs to be fully transparent. You need to know your supply chain from the beginning, where the cotton fiber is produced, up to the end. Without that, it will be difficult to implement any change in within whatever given organization that exists. I had an example when I worked for a brand. When even before I talk about sustainability cotton or anything like that, what we're trying to do was make sure the supply chain is transparent, make sure we know every single actor within the supply chain, every single tier, and then when our colleagues start talking about, okay, we need to be more sustainable, it was easy fix, because we knew the supply chain. We changed the entrance of the materials that was coming to one side, and it was easy to get that through the supply chain, because you must get, and that was a lot of the things that we discussed during the Cotton 2040 conversations. You need to know the actors each side of the supply chain. You need to have a certain level of trust. There needs collaboration, and we all need to make sure that we all driving to the same goal, which is to do the better for the future of our planet. Without having in mind, I don't think it would be difficult to make a change. But from my perspective, if we do have a transparent supply chain, whether that's in cotton or any other material, you will be able to implement change and be able to do better for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my only build on that is just around kind of not only that transparency, but that the data that can help provide that transparency is also shared equitably and used equitably by kind of across the value chain. So with that in mind, I think when you hear a lot of talk of action in value chain development, this can often refer to on-farm practices or market access that perhaps misses that broader value chain network piece that we're alluding to when we're talking about kind of interconnectivity of those actors. So that's why we really drove to have that cross-section of the system participate in our program. So Rui, just building on what you said, to what extent do kind of all parts of the value chain need to transform, including and perhaps particularly some less focused on or obvious actors such as traders or manufacturers?
It's massive. It's massive because, you know, if there isn't that supply network or supply chain that's prepared to take on the regenerative fiber of some sort that's produced on a given part of the globe, if that connectivity doesn't exist, if every actor on the supply chain is not prepared to pay the fair value for what requires to produce that product, it's not going to happen. And I think we have examples of some farmers doing a lot of good things, but they end up not being paying for the fair value, and that is unsustainable. And it's unsustainable from an operational, from a logistic, from a commercial perspective. You know, just because a farmer is applying some best practice and got some great outcomes, which are, you know, validated with X amount of data, you know, the industry needs to be prepared to change the business model. You know, they need, and a lot of the, you know, it's daunting to a certain degree that some of the brands or some of the textile organizations don't actually pass that tier 1 or tier 2 of the supply chain. They need to really understand what that supply chain means, because without that, you know, whatever material is created, it probably not suit the final product. So they need to get to know, go through all those steps within the supply chain. You know, as I said, there are many examples, you know, even on regenerative certified cotton, which is one of the buzzwords at the moment. But I worked a lot on organic cotton a couple of years ago, and it was the same situation. You know, there was a lot of effort from some of the farmers. There was a lot of organic cotton in the market, but because people were not prepared to invest in the change, a lot of that cotton will have to be sold as conventional, which is not what we wanted to do. You know, because farmers do it not because they want to make more money. Farmers do it because it's better for their soil, because it's better for the farm. I mean, they're only asking for a fair price. So it is important, you know, that that every tier on the supply chain is connected. You know, some things happen by default. You know, when there is a bit of a, you know, like a trader that is selling some cotton to a spinner. The spinner that is a raw material supplier that is interested on this certain type of cotton, and then the things end up in a brand, and then you build up a supply chain like that. But I think when you really need to make a difference, you know, that brand or that textile organization, not only brands. I think, you know, raw material suppliers have their part to play on this as well, because if they adopt it, it becomes then more easier for a brand to adopt it as well, because sometimes the challenge for the brands is they're going from here to the South Pole, or, you know, I'm exaggerating, of course, but, you know, and the supply chain of cotton can be so complex, it's so difficult. I think there is also responsibility for, you know, raw material suppliers to take that step and closing the gap that currently exists, and it will always exist to a certain degree, between growers and textile organizations. And, you mentioned merchants and merchants or traders. They have a big part to play, because they move a lot of that cotton globally. And there is some organizations that on my role now at the Sourcery we're talking with, because we want them to be part of the change, and we need them to be part of the change, because they have their knowledge, they have their expertise to do what they do, and without them, I think the supply chain will not survive. But they also play a key important role. And funny enough, some of them are seeing the importance of being part of the regenerative preferred cotton, whatever you call it, and some of them are working towards to be more supportive of those initiatives, for sure, which is good to see.
Absolutely, yeah, that's great to see, and really encouraging. Sinem, do you have anything to build on that?
As very critical thing that Rui said, that I think we all need to look the whole picture from a holistic point of view, because there is a risk in the market from the brands to find the next big thing. So it's not about finding, first it was organic and now there is regenerative. So there will be hopefully lots of many other innovations around and technologies. But what's very critical is that we need to measure the whole climate impact. So it doesn't mean anything if we have a complex a value chain. So what's very important as a rule number one is to make it simpler. Then, of course, we can consider new technologies, new fibers. But I just wanted to add, because you were very right saying that it's not only about the new technologies or new fiber innovations, but the holistic point of view.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would just add on, I think, look closer to home. It doesn't need to be a regenerative certified cotton. Some of the preferred cotton initiatives globally are doing amazing things. Look to what you already have in-house, and then you can build them from that. Absolutely right, Sinem.
Yeah, brilliant. And to that point about kind of climate impacts, I think that this talks to how actually all actors are realizing the moment is now for change. We launched the kind of first global climate risk and adaptation planning toolkit, which is still available. And what this showed is that actually a process of diversification in your supply chain is perhaps a little short-sighted, because you're missing the reality of climate impact hitting all cotton growing regions. We know that kind of we are going to hit 1.5. We know that resilience is going to become front and center. And we know that cotton growing regions are already facing, for example, in the US, decade-long drought, and in Turkey, extreme heat stress. So with what we've discussed already around kind of regenerative, how does this ladder up to resilience? Rui, perhaps you can start us off. How would a regenerative value chain lead to that kind of resilience?
I mean, it's massively important. I think, continue to invest on best practice adaptation to climate is massively important. I think, the report that came out of that Cotton 2040 was an eye-opener even for me, which I've got more than 20 years experience on cotton. It is real. There are regions in the globe where cotton will not be able to produce cotton. And I think the scary thing, if you look at it from agronomic perspectives, if you can grow cotton, which is basically a perennial tree that grows in tropical conditions, there's nothing else you can grow. I think that's just a scary thing. But I think that this question got twofold. One, I think we need to continue to promote and invest on those regions to help them to be able to adapt to climate resilience. And there are some great examples of work being doing globally. And I think we cannot forget that some of the ones, okay, in the United States, we're seeing that to a certain extent, but, India, which is one of the it is the biggest cotton producer globally, and the all smallholder farmers, it's where we need to invest the most, because it's not just the dependency of raw material for the supply chain, it's the actual impact they have on the livelihood of the people that live in there. It is massive, so we should be continuing to invest on that, and there are some great examples of that. But while we continue to invest on some of those practices and best practices, we need also to be careful how we're using the current cotton that we're purchasing nowadays. It's not going to be very far away from that food crops will start competing with textile crops, and that will become even a bigger problem. And I think, as Sinem probably can talk to this more than I do, but I think, looking at the waste that happens on the supply chain, it could also be a point of becoming resilient and regenerative, because sometimes we buy X amount of tons, but we're only using a fraction of it. And the waste occurs throughout the supply chain. It's not just at one point. I think, we should also look at it from that angle for sure. I think the climate change is something that is real, it's happening. And as much as, the farmers and growers adopt new practices, not just because they want to look after their soil or look after water, the scary thing, they actually got to do that to survive. So we must invest on that. But I think, my take as well from a bigger approach is, look at the waste within the supply chain. If we have less waste, so there will be less demanding, and I think we'll benefit everyone.
Yeah, perhaps Sinem, you can comment on that point, and from a brand perspective as well, what a resilient value chain might look like, and any examples you have that can share. And I think I echo Rui on the waste and having to get a grip on various different waste streams without the value chain. So yeah, from your perspective, what does that look like?
I think before looking ways to improve the value chain or looking for materials, innovative materials, we really need to have an eye on new technologies around how to utilize the waste or how to avoid having such waste within the textile industry. So that should be maybe a very critical topic. And now many brands, I see many brands around dedicated to only use the textile wastes as raw material rather than using some new fabrics, fibers, whatever. So I think this is should be the priority for the fashion brands to utilize the waste and designing in a circular way, or improving the design abilities around using the waste, utilizing the waste. So this is very critical. And also when it comes to resilience in the industry, or not even the cross industries, I think seeing the planet and the situation around the food crisis, the future of agriculture, I also think it's very valuable resources, Neil, what you provide. That was also eye-opening for me. And seeing the current dynamics of the food industry, thinking about the cotton for the textile is becoming very, big conflict for myself. And I think brands will also fashion brands will also very soon needs to find ways to use different materials, and even to use water in a different way, because we are now very soon in a world that we are on a survival mode rather than how to improve is not an enough phrase for ourselves. So that's why regenerative thinking is very critical. We might use a resource, but at the same time, we need to think about how we can give back so that we have that balance and resilience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, it's while we're trying to protect what we have and, adopting our best practices, we also look at how we use what we got at this moment in time. It's very, very important, I think. So those reusing of cotton and circular systems and recycling, it's massively important. And there are some strides in the industry that are happening at the moment. I hope they really go to another level.
Yeah, one of the things that stands out to me of what you've just said, both just said, is this competing land use, and something that we'll have to grapple with going forward, not only with other food crops, but also with energy systems. And we know that this kind of will require more land, also commitments around deforestation. It's a complex issue that I think every actor needs to engage with in a really full way, but also having the knowledge and the data to engage with it. I'm conscious of time. I think we have about 5 minutes left. So in order to kind of end on a bit of a positive perspective on this vision that will accelerate us to a just and regenerative future, as we close, can you perhaps speak to some examples of where you're seeing kind of real momentum and companies or individuals that are giving you that hope? Sinem, why don't you go first?
I think one of the best practices I've seen lately is around building trust in the material system for textiles. It's called Aware. It's a investment around tracer materials, trying to secure the whole transparency within the industry, because as we just talked about, the how we can measure ourselves in a better way is the starting point to improve. So with that aspect, I think it's very critical to know either it's an organic cotton, regenerative cotton, or recycled material, to see the whole flow, the whole cycle, and then find the areas where we need to improve or measure in a better way. So I love this disruptive thinking because we saw that the existing certifications or the whole measurements are not enough to measure ourselves or to understand where the exact problem is. So I think this is one of the best practices that I've seen lately. So Rui, you can add maybe some other examples.
Yeah, I think I just touch on the point I said about certifications. I completely agree. You don't need a certification to be able to have a meaningful impact. I think that, when you talk about regenerative, we don't need to talk about regenerative because there are so many preferred cotton initiatives doing so many good things, and then, there's some places where you can look at. Textile exchange is a good place to look at. You can look at what the impact of each of the preferred materials look at. Depends what brand you are, use cotton or synthetics or whatever that is. It's a good place to start. But if we're talking about cotton specifically, there are, we currently talk with a farmer in US, and they've been adopting regenerative practice for a while, and they understand they have to have that commercial arm to be able to sell that fiber. So that the hardwick planting in US, in North Carolina, there is people like the Sheffer groups in Brazil. They're doing amazing things on cotton as well, or good at cotton in Australia. But there are other preferred cotton initiatives. The US Cotton Trust Protocol. They are really using data to measure improvement, which is fantastic. But there are other even more holistic approach. There is a landscape production approach led by Laudis Foundation in India, where some brands are involved. But more important, they also have food organizations involved. And there's a new one starting, another one, landscape, regenerative production landscape, starting in Tanzania as well. And again, GIZ and Albertas leads this one. They're massive. If textile organizations want to get involved, they're absolutely massive. Not to finish off, what we're doing in Sourcery. Of course, we don't produce cotton, but we build up that supply chain. We help brands get that connectivity, or other raw material suppliers or other textile organizations to have that connectivity down from the farmer to the finished product. And we can go upstream or downstream because it is important. And sometimes they need a bit of help. And I think once that connectivity is done, they can do whatever they want. And I think it's massive. And that's what we're trying to do with the project we have, a sort of really connect all the dots within the supply chain for whatever type of cotton you want to procure.
Yeah, and super important work. I love those examples. I was actually going to say the kind of landscape initiative one myself. I think that really does speak to the kind of, finally, I think moving to a place of acknowledging that we need holistic action. It needs to appreciate the complexity of landscapes on the ground, production landscapes on the ground. Another one is I'm seeing kind of increasingly supplier groups and manufacturing in regions such as Southeast Asia really starting to come together and speak with a collective voice, which I think is really important in terms of voicing some of the challenges that they face in driving and playing a part in this future. And then finally, from Forum's perspective, we're also having really interesting conversations with multilateral finance institutions and development banks who are now asking these questions. So it's not now very kind of straightforward questions around how can we support farmers. It's how can we support farmer communities? How can we transform value chains? And I think that's fantastic. Go for it.
I think I would say, you don't necessarily need to purchase the cotton from one of those projects. I think get involved. Just by getting involved and learning what that means, then you'll be ready to take the next step. Don't be afraid of being involved with those projects, because there are many ways of being involved. It requires time for sure, but I think just by being involved and learning with that will make a whole of a difference to everyone and to that particular organization.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. That's a great call to action at the end. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for Sustainable Brands.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and thank you both for the illuminating conversation on building kind of resilient and regenerative supply chains. You can find information about Forum, the Sourcery, and BluProjects all online, and you can get in touch with us following the session. And if, as I said, we'll be releasing a report on the learnings of the Cotton 2040 initiative, so please stay tuned for that. That's all from this panel. Wishing you all a productive and educational conference. And Vincent, I'll hand back over to you. Thank you very much, Rui and Sinem.
Thank you. Bye-bye.